Have you ever seen a moment so honest that the whole room forgot to breathe? Do you know what happens when truth waits in someone's heart for many years tonight? The silence around Keanu and Sandra was stronger than every word spoken before. Evening began with a gentle warm glow inside a quiet hall in downtown Toronto, where a small live audience had gathered for a charity conversation that was supposed to be relaxed, casual, and full of light stories from their long careers. The event was part of a kindness fundraiser meant to support young artists in the city, but the air felt different from the moment Keanu and Sandra walked in together. People could sense something heavy under the surface, something carried for a long time, something neither of them had ever said out loud. The host had no idea what was coming, and the audience did not expect anything more than a few jokes and gentle memories from the old days. Yet everything changed when one question rose from the front row and drifted through the room like a soft arrow that landed right in the center of both their hearts. The question was simple but loaded. It came from a woman in her late 30s who looked nervous even before speaking. She asked in a soft, steady voice if there was ever a moment in Keanu and Sandra's lives when they thought about choosing a different life together, one away from cameras, away from fame, away from the world's expectations. The room fell quiet as soon as she said it. No one moved, not even the host. The question did not sound dramatic when spoken aloud, but something in the way Keanu slowly turned to look at Sandra made every person in the room straighten their posture and lean in just a little closer. Keanu's eyes softened first, then tightened, as if he was remembering something difficult, something warm and painful at the same time. Sandra swallowed slowly and gave a small, polite smile, the kind she used when she needed to protect her heart. Keanu did not answer right away. Took a breath through his nose, the kind of breath that people take when they finally decide to stop hiding something they have carried for too long. Sandra watched him closely, and in her eyes there was a very tiny flicker of fear mixed with curiosity and something else. Something deeper, something only people who share a past can recognize without speaking. When Keanu finally spoke, his voice was calm and steady. But there was a tremble under the surface that only someone with experience and pain would notice. He said that there were many moments in life when paths almost changed, when two people almost made a choice that could have shaped their futures differently. He said sometimes life surprises you with a moment that is so gentle and so real that you never forget it, even if you never talk about it. The room leaned even closer. Someone in the third row adjusted their glasses, and someone else held their breath without realizing it. Sandra's eyes softened too, but her lips pressed tightly together as if she was preparing herself. Keanu continued speaking, and his next words made the room fall into a deeper stillness. The kind people feel during a confession that no one expected. He said there was a day many years ago when something happened between them, something private, something brave, something kind. He said he had never spoken about it in public, not because it was wrong or painful, but because it was sacred. He used that word sacred with such honesty that a few audience members exchanged surprised glances. The host tried to gently shift the conversation back into lighter territory, but Keanu's expression made it clear he was not finished. He had waited too long, and maybe the moment was finally here, maybe. The silence between them needed to break so that they could both breathe again. Sandra placed her hand on her own arm, a soft, protective gesture she often did when facing a truth she was not ready for. Keanu noticed it, and for a brief second his eyes revealed a mixture of guilt and tenderness, as if he never meant for this moment to be heavy for her. The audience was no longer just watching a charity event. They were witnessing a connection unraveling in real time. The tension was not the sharp, painful kind, but the soft, emotional kind that grows between two people who share a truth they avoided for many years. It felt like walking into a room full of unsaid memories and realizing the door behind you had closed. Keanu said the moment he was talking about happened at a small retreat near the ocean where they had been invited to speak to young filmmakers early in their careers. He said after the event ended, they walked along the quiet beach and talked about life dreams, fears, and the things they never had the courage to share with anyone else. He said one moment under the fading sunset, Sandra looked fragile for the first time in his life. He had seen her as more than a friend, more than a co-star. He said her eyes that evening carried a story he could never forget. Sandra's expression softened again. But there was a deep sadness building under her smile, the kind of sadness that comes from remembering, something beautiful that you thought time had erased. She nodded lightly as if she remembered. The same evening, but the host and the audience could see she was not ready for the direction Keanu was taking. She whispered a small please not now to Keanu, but he had already crossed the emotional threshold, and he knew he needed to finish what he had started. Keanu said something happened on that beach that no one in the world ever knew about, something that changed the way he looked at Sandra for years. He said that they made a promise together, a promise so quiet and so strange that they both laughed at it afterward, but deep inside it mattered more than either of them understood at that time. The audience leaned so far forward that one man almost slipped off his chair. The air felt heavy, thick, and charged like a storm, waiting to break. People looked at Sandra and saw the tension in her jaw, the faint shimmer in her eyes, the way her breath caught every few seconds. This was no ordinary memory. Something important was buried there. Keanu then paused and looked straight at Sandra. The entire room froze. Sandra looked back at him and her eyes widened just a little, the way a person's eyes widen when they realize a long-hidden truth is about to rise to the surface. Keanu said that the promise they made was not a joke after all. He said that on that quiet beach under the orange glow of the last sunlight, they agreed on something they never repeated to anyone. He said they agreed that if life ever separated them, if pain ever entered their lives in a way that made them question who they were or what they deserved, they would choose kindness above everything else. But that was not the real secret. That was only the surface of the truth. Sandra's breathing changed. She looked down at her hands, then back at Keanu. Her shoulders tightened. She whispered again, "Please, Keanu," but he closed his eyes and continued. He said that during that same moment, under that same fading sunset, they made one more promise. A promise so personal that he had never said it aloud, not even to himself. He said they both took off their rings, the ones they wore for a film shoot. Not real rings, but they symbolized something for both of them. He said they placed the rings on the sand between them and jokingly said that if life ever wanted them to end up together, it would find a way to return those rings to them. The room gasped lightly, but no one laughed. It did not sound like a joke now. It sounded like two hearts trying to understand something they were too young to face at the time. Keanu said he had kept his ring from that day. He never told anyone. Kept it in a small wooden box in his home. Not because he believed in the promise, not because he expected anything from it, but because it made him feel kind when the world felt cold. It reminded him that someone out there saw him on a day when he felt invisible. Tears appeared in Sandra's eyes before she could hide them. Keanu noticed, and his voice softened even more. He said he found something recently that made him think the world was trying to speak to him. He said that a few weeks ago, while preparing for this charity event, he opened that box and found something he did not expect. He found another ring inside it. Sandra's ring. The one she placed on the sand that evening many years ago. He said he had no idea how it appeared in his box. He thought maybe he had collected both rings by accident, but something about it felt strange. Felt tensional. Felt like life was trying to remind him of that moment. The room fell into a silence, so deep that people could hear the faint hum of the lights above them. Sandra covered her mouth with her hand. Her face showed a mixture of shock, fear, and emotional confusion. Keanu then reached slowly into his jacket pocket. His hand shook a little. The audience leaned closer. Sandra's eyes widened with fear or anticipation or both. He pulled out a small wooden box. Every single person in that room forgot how to breathe. Sandra whispered, "No, Keanu, please not this." Keanu looked at her with a softness that held years of hidden emotions. He opened the box slowly. The hinges clicked quietly. Inside were two thin rings resting side by side on a small piece of fabric. The same rings they placed on the sand many years ago. He lifted his head to speak, and just before he said the words that would change, everything the lights in the room suddenly went out. The audience screamed. Sandra grabbed Keanu's arm. The room fell into complete darkness. Have you ever felt a silence so deep it felt alive? Have you ever stood in darkness with a truth burning inches away? Tonight, The room held its breath, because no one knew what would happen next. Blackout came without warning. 1 second, the audience was staring at Keanu holding the small wooden box with the 2 rings inside, and the next second, everything around him vanished into absolute darkness. People screamed, but not the loud, terrified screams of danger. Instead, the startled, broken, sharp sounds that people make when their minds cannot understand what is happening. Sandra felt Keanu's arm stiffen beside her as her hand gripped him tighter. She could not see anything, not even the outline of his face. But she could feel the warmth of his arm and the steady beat of his pulse under her fingers. She whispered his name softly, but the sound was swallowed by the darkness. As if the room itself had become a living shadow, the host's voice echoed somewhere in the pitch-black space, asking people to remain calm and assuring them that the technicians were working on restoring the lights, but his voice trembled in a way that revealed he had no idea what was going on. Chairs scraped on the floor as a few people tried to stand and then sat back down quickly. When they realized they could not see where they were stepping, someone dropped their phone, and the small clatter hit the silent, dark air like a stone falling into still water. The blackout felt unnatural, too sudden, too quiet, too complete. Sandra whispered Keanu again. This time he squeezed her hand softly. His voice came through the darkness, warm, steady, and protective. He told her he was right there, that she was not alone, that everything was okay. She held on to that voice like a lifeline in a world that had momentarily disappeared. She realized her breath had quickened, but she tried to steady it. She knew Keanu was calm even when the world shifted unexpectedly. She leaned into that calmness as if it could shield her from the unknown. Then suddenly, a small faint glow appeared near the back of the room. Someone had turned on their phone flashlight, and then another person did the same, and then another, until small patches of white and blue light shimmered through the darkness, like tiny stars blinking awake in a night sky. The room slowly regained shape. The shadows retreated just enough for people to see outlines. Instead of complete emptiness, his face finally appeared in the soft, flickering glow of someone's phone. His expression was calm, but his eyes were alert, aware, focused. He still held the wooden box in one hand, but his other hand kept Sandra close, without hesitation. The audience watched them with a new kind of silence, not fear, but a strange reverence, as if the blackout itself had placed a spotlight on the two of them. Even without electricity, the host tried to regain control of the situation, telling people that the team was checking the power system, but the audience had already shifted their attention back to Keanu and Sandra. The blackout had not erased the emotional tension. If anything, it had intensified it. The moment before the lights went out was still hanging between them, like an unfinished sentence. Sandra looked at the wooden box in his hand. The 2 rings inside had a strange glow under the faint lights from the phones. She whispered quietly, asking why he brought the rings tonight. Her voice carried a trembling softness, a question wrapped in fear, curiosity, and something deeper she had locked away for years. Keanu looked at her with gentle eyes. He opened his mouth to answer, but the lights flickered once. The audience gasped softly. Sandra tightened her grip again. Then the main lights returned all at once, bathing the entire room in bright clarity that felt almost too sharp after the long, quiet darkness. People blinked against the sudden brightness. The room was exactly the same, yet something felt completely different. As if the darkness had rearranged emotions that could not be undone, the host tried to continue the event lightly, but the energy had shifted. Everyone was focused on Keanu. Sandra looked as if her heart was caught between running and staying. Keanu held the wooden box with a gentle firmness. He slowly stepped toward the small table at the front of the stage so he could place the box down. But just as he reached out to set it down, Sandra touched his arm, stopping him. Their eyes met. The audience fell silent again. The host stepped back, giving them space they did not ask for but clearly needed. Sandra's voice trembled, but she kept it steady enough to speak. She told Keanu that some truths were meant to remain between 2 people, not because they were wrong or dangerous, but because they belonged to a part of life that was private, sacred, and untouched by the outside world. She said that the promise they made on that beach was special, but she did not know if she was ready for the world to hear it. She looked at the rings with an expression that carried both longing and heartbreak. Keanu listened carefully. His eyes softened. His breathing slowed. It was clear he understood her fear, but he also understood his own truth. He told her gently that he did not bring the rings to reveal a secret that would cause her pain. He brought them because he found something strange and wanted to understand it with her, not without her. The audience leaned forward in the soft tension of the moment. Keanu continued, his voice low and full of sincerity. He said that when he found Sandra's ring inside the box, he had been confused because he had no memory of picking it up from the sand that day. He said he had always assumed she kept her own ring. He said something felt unusual, as if someone or something placed the ring in his box for a reason he could not understand. Sandra shook her head in disbelief. She told him she had kept the ring for years in a small pouch inside her personal drawer at home. She said she had not touched it in a long time. Her voice grew softer as she admitted she had forgotten about the ring completely until now. Keanu listened with wide eyes. The host looked stunned. The audience exchanged quick glances. If Sandra did not give him the ring and Keanu never took it, how did it end up in the box? Sandra's breathing deepened. She looked down at the wooden box again, as if afraid it might hold more than rings. Keanu placed the box on the table gently, like placing something fragile and alive. The host finally gathered enough composure to ask a question. He asked if maybe a friend or assistant or someone from their past had moved the ring accidentally. Keanu shook his head firmly. He said no one else had touched that box for years. Sandra agreed. She said her ring had always been inside her drawer in a small blue pouch covered by old envelopes. She said she lived alone and no one else would have touched it. The room fell into another layer of silence deeper than before. This was no longer just a story of two people sharing an emotional moment from the past. It was becoming something different. Something mysterious. Something that made people wonder what unseen forces shape the paths of people who are meant to meet again. Sandra took a deep breath and finally asked Keanu the question she had been afraid to ask. She wanted to know why he kept the ring in his box all these years. She asked him what it meant to him now in this moment. Her voice cracked slightly at the end. The audience noticed the tremor in her shoulders. Keanu looked down at his hands for a moment, then back at Sandra. He told her that there were times in his life when he felt lost, when the world felt too heavy and too loud. He said the ring reminded him of a moment of pure sincerity, a moment when two people stood by the ocean and spoke from the heart, without fear, without expectations. He said the ring reminded him that kindness can survive pain, that connection can survive distance, and that some bonds remain even when time tries to bury them. Sandra's eyes filled. With tears she did not bother wiping away. She looked at Keanu with a mixture of pain, gratitude, affection, and unresolved feelings. She had tried to hide from herself for years. She whispered that the ring had meant the same thing to her too. She said she kept it because it reminded her of who she was during that moment on the beach, a woman who felt safe, seen, and understood. The room was silent. The audience was not watching a performance. They were witnessing to hearts speaking in a way that could not be planned or rehearsed. Keanu stepped closer to Sandra. The host stepped further back, realizing this moment no longer needed guidance. Keanu picked up the wooden box carefully. He opened it again, revealing the two rings. He told Sandra he did not bring the rings to make a declaration or to confuse her. He brought them because he believed life had placed the second ring there for a reason. He told her he wanted to show her the box privately before the event, but never found the right moment because everything felt too heavy, too sacred, too real. Sandra wiped a tear from her face. She stepped slightly closer, as if pulled by a force she did not want to resist. She looked at the rings again, and in her eyes there was a spark of something deep, old, and familiar. She whispered that she did not know what the reason was, but something inside her felt a shift the moment she saw the rings together. Keanu asked her gently if she wanted him to stop speaking about the beach promise. He told her he never wanted to hurt her. Sandra shook her head slowly. She said she just needed a moment to understand why the past was returning now after so many years. She said part of her feared opening that chapter again because she was not sure. If her heart was ready for the emotions hidden inside it. Keanu nodded. He understood. He took a slow breath. He was about to close the wooden box when someone in the audience suddenly spoke. A soft voice from the second row said, "I know who brought the ring back." Entire room turned toward the sound. A woman stood up slowly. Her face was pale. Her hands trembled slightly. She looked at Keanu and Sandra with a mixture of guilt and uncertainty. She said she knew something she should have told them long ago. She said she had been keeping a secret too. She said the blackout was not an accident. The audience gasped. Asterisk. Have you ever heard a confession that made your heartbeat slow down? Have you ever watched a stranger hold the answer to someone else's past? Tonight a quiet woman stood up and changed everything. For Keanu and Sandra, the room shifted as if the air itself had moved. Everyone turned toward the woman who had spoken from the second row. Her voice had not been loud, but it carried a trembling certainty that sliced through the tension like a blade made of memory. She looked down at her trembling hands, then raised her head again, slowly meeting Keanu's eyes first, then Sandra's. Sandra froze. Keanu's brows drew together in gentle confusion, but his posture remained calm, steady, and open. He took a small step toward the woman as if inviting her to speak without fear. The host hesitated, unsure if he should intervene, but something about the woman's expression made him step back. This was no random interruption. Something inside her carried weight, something that had waited a long time to be spoken. The audience sensed it too. The entire hall fell into a silence, so deep it felt like everyone had pressed pause on their own breathing. The woman introduced herself in a quiet, unsteady voice. She said her name was Mara, but her voice trembled again. As she said it, as if even speaking her own name felt like reopening an old wound. She said she was not famous, she was not part of the film industry, she was not someone important on a public scale, but she carried a truth that touched both Keanu and Sandra in a way they had never imagined. Keanu listened with gentle patience. Sandra's shoulders tightened, her breathing shallow but steady. She felt a strange pressure in her chest, a soft fear mixed with hope and confusion. She sensed that whatever Mara was about to reveal was connected not to the darkness of the room, but to the darkness inside someone's memory. Mara took a small, shaky breath before continuing. She said she once worked at a small retreat center many years ago near the ocean. Immediately, Sandra's eyes widened. Keanu's expression changed too. The audience recognized the connection. This was the same retreat where Keanu and Sandra had walked on the beach, where they had talked for hours, where they had made that quiet, fragile promise with the rings. The memory hung between them like a forgotten photograph suddenly uncovered. Mara continued speaking. She said she had been young, then a quiet, shy woman who kept to herself and preferred observing rather than interacting. She said she had worked behind the scenes, cleaning, setting up rooms, arranging supplies, and keeping the retreat center running smoothly while guests enjoyed peaceful days by the ocean. She said she knew Keanu and Sandra were there for a speaking event, and though she had admired them from afar, she never approached them. She respected their privacy and valued her own silence. The audience listened closely. Mara's voice shook again as she said she remembered the evening Keanu and Sandra walked along the beach. She remembered seeing them from a distance, not to invade their moment, but because she was gathering supplies after sunset and happened to pass by the open path that led to the sand. She said she saw the two of them sitting close, talking softly, their expressions full of vulnerability and quiet honesty. Sandra's heartbeat quickened. She remembered that evening vividly. She remembered the warm breeze, the ocean waves, the gentle orange light sinking into the horizon, and the rare feeling of safety that wrapped around her that night. She felt her throat tighten. Hearing someone else describe that moment felt like someone had walked into her most private memory. Keanu felt the same. He remembered the feeling of being understood in a way he had not expected. He remembered Sandra's gentle voice, her laughter, her sadness, the way her eyes shimmered as she talked about her life with sincerity that only came out when she trusted someone. Deeply, Mara's next words made the room fall into a deeper silence. She said she saw the two of them kneel beside the rings they placed on the sand. She said she did not hear the promise they made, but she saw the tenderness in their actions. She said she saw them laugh quietly afterward, though it was a soft laugh filled with emotion. She said she saw Sandra pick up her ring and Keanu pick up his dot. Then her voice shook harder. She said she also saw something else. Sandra's hands tightened against her chair. Keanu leaned ever so slightly forward without realizing it. Mara said that after Keanu and Sandra walked away from the beach, she stayed behind to finish closing the area. She said the moon had risen by then, and she saw something gleaming in the sand. She said she found a ring half buried under the place where the two had been sitting. She said she remembered it clearly because the moonlight hit the ring in a way that made it look like it was glowing. Sandra gasped softly. She touched her chest instinctively. Keanu looked deeply confused. He told Mara that they had each taken their rings. Mara nodded. She said she thought the same. She said she was sure they each took their rings. She said that was why she was confused when she found one in the sand. The room shifted again. A soft murmur rippled through the audience. Sandra whispered no softly under her breath, as if trying to match her memory with Mara's words. She looked at Keanu, but her eyes were full of uncertainty. She told Keanu she remembered taking her ring with her. She said she remembered holding it later that night. She said she remembered putting it in her bag before she left the retreat. Keanu nodded because he remembered the same. He remembered seeing her tuck the ring into her pocket. Mara looked down at her hands again. She said she picked up the ring because she did not want to leave something important in the sand. She said she meant to return it to one of them the next morning before they left, but when she went to the front desk to find them, she was told that Keanu and Sandra had already checked out very early. They left before sunrise because they had a flight and a schedule to follow. The audience listened with open disbelief. The host looked stunned, as if he too had stepped into a story far deeper than he expected. Mara explained in a trembling voice that she kept the ring in the lost and found box at the retreat for years. She said at first she checked the box every few days thinking someone might call and ask about it, but no one ever did. She said the retreat eventually closed due to financial issues, and the staff had to pack everything into storage boxes. She said she took a few items with her to prevent them from being thrown away, including the small lost and found box. She said she wasn't sure why, but she felt the ring meant something more than a forgotten item. Keanu's heart pounded. Sandra's breath trembled. Mara swallowed hard before continuing. She said that several years ago she experienced a difficult time in her life. She lost a loved one and had to move homes. During the move, she found the ring again, still wrapped in a small cloth inside the lost and found box. She said she felt drawn to it somehow, as if it carried a story that was waiting to be returned. To the right people then, she said something that made Sandra press her hand against her heart gently. She said in that moment she made a decision. Mara told them she traveled to Toronto years later and tried to attend one of Keanu's charity events. She said she planned to give him the ring and explain everything, but she lost her courage. She said she did not want to intrude on his life. She said she left the ring at the reception desk with a note asking them to give it to him privately, but the staff told her they could not guarantee it because items left without names often got lost. Sandra covered her mouth with her hand, tears already forming. Keanu's eyes softened with compassion. Mara continued, saying that months passed and she heard nothing, so she assumed the ring never reached him. She said she did not try again because life kept pulling her in different directions, and she did not know how to reach out without sounding strange or invasive. Asterisk. The audience listened deeply. Then Mara's voice cracked as she said she believed the blackout tonight was not an accident, but a push from fate, from timing, from something bigger than all of them to finally speak the truth she had held for too long. Keanu looked at the wooden box again, slowly, then looked at Mara with steady, sincere eyes. He asked her gently if she was the one who placed the ring into his box at his home. Mara shook her head immediately. She said she had never been to his home. She said she had not seen him in person until tonight. She said leaving the ring at the charity event years ago was the only attempt she made. Sandra took a shaky breath. The room grew colder with the unanswered question. If Mara never placed the ring in Keanu's box, and Sandra never gave him the ring and Keanu never took it, who did asterisk? Mara stared at her hands again. Then she said something that made the room tense. She said she believed someone else must have carried the ring to Keanu at some point. Someone who saw the connection between him and Sandra, someone who understood the meaning of the promise. She said she did not know who it was or how they did it, but she believed there was a reason the ring returned at this very moment. Sandra suddenly felt dizzy. Her hands trembled. Keanu stepped slightly closer to her. He whispered to her gently, asking if she was okay. Nodded, but her voice was shaky when she said she was fine. Keanu stayed close anyway. Mara spoke again. She said she attended the event tonight because she heard Keanu and Sandra would be here together for the first time in a while. She said she felt something inside her telling her she could not stay silent anymore. She said she believed the truth would remain incomplete if she did not speak. Keanu thanked her softly. Sandra nodded with watery eyes, her heart overwhelmed and confused. But the story was not over. Mara took another deep breath, her voice trembling even more. She said she had one more piece to reveal something she had told no one, not even her closest family. She said that when she placed the ring in the lost and found box all those years ago, she found a small folded piece of paper tucked under it. She thought it had been dropped by a guest, so she opened it to see if it contained information she needed to return to someone. What she found was not a name or an address. It was a message. Mara said she still remembered every word because the message had stayed with her all these years like a whisper that never fully faded. She said the note was written in soft, almost trembling handwriting. The message said, "Return this to him when the time is right. Their story is not finished, their moon froze." Sandra's hand dropped from her chest, her breath caught. Tears pooled in her eyes. Keanu's jaw tightened in emotional shock. He whispered who wrote that, but Mara shook her head. She said the paper had no signature, no name, no clue. The host looked pale. The audience was utterly silent. Mara said she believed someone who knew them well, someone who cared about both of them, had written the note. She said she never understood it, but now standing in front of them, seeing the rings together again, hearing Keanu speak about that day, she finally felt the meaning of the message. Sandra felt her heart tremble so deeply it hurt. She whispered that no one knew about that beach moment, not even her closest family. Keanu said the same. He told Mara that the only people on that beach that day were Sandra himself and the ocean. Mara nodded slowly, her voice barely audible. She said sometimes life speaks through people who are not meant to stay in the story, but meant to deliver the message. Sandra's eyes overflowed. Keanu reached out and gently touched her hand in front of everyone, not as a performer or a celebrity, but as a man trying to steady someone he cared about with all his heart. The room watched breathless. Mara's voice trembled again as she said she had one last thing to confess. She said she had not come here alone. She said the person who wrote the note was here. Tonight the entire room gasped. The host stepped back. Keanu's eyes widened. Sandra's heart nearly stopped. Mara pointed toward the far corner of the hall. Every person turned their head at once. Someone stood up slowly from the shadows. Asterisk, have you ever felt the whole world shift because one person stood up? Have you ever watched a stranger rise from the shadows with a truth that shakes every heart? Tonight the room changed forever when the person behind the old message finally stepped forwards. Moment Mara pointed to the far corner of the hall, the entire audience turned so quickly that chairs squeaked against the polished floor. The air felt thick as if something invisible had wrapped around every chest and held it still.
Oh.
For several seconds no one moved. Even the lights seemed to grow softer, as if they too were waiting for the next breath, the next truth, the next moment that would break open everything Keanu and Sandra thought they understood. A figure rose slowly from the dimly lit corner. The shadows had hidden them almost completely until now. A man stepped forward into the light, one slow, careful step at a time. He looked older, with silver threading through his dark hair and lines on his face that spoke of years of silence. His hands trembled slightly and his eyes were warm but heavy, as if he carried more truth than he ever wanted to hold. Sandra instinctively reached for Keanu's arm. Keanu stepped slightly in front of her without thinking, not to shield her from danger, but to steady the gravity of the moment. The host stood, frozen mouth slightly open. The audience leaned forward like a single living being, waiting for the man to speak. Mara lowered her head, tears slipping down her cheeks. She whispered that she could not carry this secret anymore. She whispered that it was not hers to hold. Keanu nodded softly to her, a gesture of gratitude and gentleness. Sandra offered her a trembling look of compassion. But their attention returned almost immediately to the man approaching the stage. The man stopped a few steps away from the front row. He swallowed hard. His voice cracked before he even spoke. When he finally managed to form words, they came out soft, slow, and filled with years of unspoken weight. He said his name was Ilian. He said he once worked at the retreat center near the ocean. He said he was not a staff member like Mara, but a temporary assistant who helped during events and stayed in the background, noticed by most people. Sandra's eyes widened in recognition. Not because she remembered Elian specifically, but because she remembered seeing someone lingering. Near the gates, the evening she and Keanu walked on the beach. She remembered a quiet silhouette passing by the wooden path. She never knew who it was. She assumed it was a guest or a staff member. Keanu remembered the same. A faint, distant figure near the outdoor lights. Someone who never approached Elian took another step forward, kept his eyes down for a moment, as if gathering the courage to face a truth that had lived too long in the dark. When he lifted his gaze, there was a deep sincerity shining through his eyes. Sincerity mixed with regret. He said he had seen Keanu and Sandra together that night on the beach. He said he never intended to intrude on their moment, but he had. Been heading back to the main building when he noticed them sitting near the shoreline. He said he watched them only for a few seconds, but those seconds left an echo in his memory. He said there was something about the way they looked at each other, something gentle, honest, raw. He said he had never seen two people share such a moment. He said he saw the rings glinting on the sand before the waves reached the shore. Keanu listened carefully, his brow furrowing in deep thought. Sandra placed her fingers gently over her lips, her eyes fixed on Elian. The audience hung on to every word. No one dared to blink. Elian said he returned to the same spot later that night after finishing his tasks. He said he found the ring half buried in the sand, just like Mara had described. He said he picked it up not knowing whose it was, but something inside him felt it belonged to someone who was meant to have it. He said he wrapped it in a small cloth from his pocket because he did not want it scratched or lost again. Said he planned to return it the next morning. But Keanu and Sandra had already left before dawn. The room murmured softly at the connection between Elian's story and Mara's. Their memories overlapped like two halves of the same truth. Then Elian revealed the part that made the room grow still again. He said he was the one who wrote the message. Keanu felt his heartbeat shift. Sandra closed her eyes briefly, letting the realization settle. Elian explained that he wrote the message not because he knew Keanu or Sandra personally, but because he had seen many people come and go at the retreat. He said he had watched guests struggle with life, relationships, dreams, and heartbreak. Said he always believed that some connections were too rare to ignore. He said when he saw Keanu and Sandra on the beach, something about their moment felt different than anything he had ever witnessed. Said it felt like two souls recognizing each other even if they did not understand it themselves. Sandra's eyes filled with tears again. Keanu's expression softened with emotion he could not hide. Elian said he did not sign the note because he felt the message was not about him. It was about them. He said he kept the ring and the note together, hoping one day he would have the chance to return them to the right person. He said life led him away from the retreat center shortly afterward. He moved from city to city, working small jobs trying to build a quiet life. But he kept the lost ring and the note with him for years. He said the moment came when he felt the time was right. He said he waited until both of them were in the same city again. Said he found a way to deliver the ring anonymously by placing it in the donation box of a charity event, knowing Keanu often checked items personally. He said he hoped Keanu would eventually find it and understand that some promises return when the heart is ready. Keanu looked stunned. He whispered that he did check donation boxes often. He whispered that sometimes he opened small packages by himself, out of curiosity or gratitude. He whispered he never checked names or senders. Sandra watched him with wide eyes. Elian nodded. Said he placed the ring there wrapped in a soft cloth. He said the wooden box was not his. Someone else must have placed the ring inside Keanu's box later, or perhaps Keanu knowingly put the ring away without recognizing it at the time because he was overwhelmed or distracted. Keanu ran a hand slowly through his hair, trying to fit the pieces together. The audience murmured again, trying to understand what Elian was saying. Elian then said something even more shocking. He said the blackout earlier was connected to him. The room said. The host stepped forward, slightly uncertain. Ellen raised his hands gently, as if calming invisible waves. He said he did not cause the blackout in a harmful way. He said he worked in lighting and electrical setups for stages and events. He said he had noticed a small malfunction in the hall system earlier in the evening. And he warned a technician, but they brushed him off, saying the system always flickered but never failed, Elian said when the lights began flickering again. During the event, he tried to alert the team, but they were busy. He said he feared an uncontrolled surge, so he manually flipped the system off for safety. The audience gasped softly. The host's eyes widened at Keanu, exhaled deeply. Sandra released the breath she had been holding. Elian said he did not know the blackout would happen at the exact moment Keanu opened the wooden box. He said he did not plan it. Said he only acted out of concern. Said it was coincidence or timing or fate, not intention. Sandra placed her hand over her chest again, as if steadying herself. Keanu nodded slowly, understanding the sincerity in Elian's voice. Mara wiped her tears quietly, relieved that the truth was finally unfolding. But Elian was not done. He said he had kept something else, something he did not plan to reveal tonight. Something he never believed he would share. He said he had a photograph. Sandra's breath caught sharply. Keanu looked confused. The audience leaned closer. Elin said it was not a staged picture or a fan photo. He said he took it by accident. He said that small camera he carried with him that night at the retreat was meant for capturing images of the ocean for the retreat's brochure. He said he snapped a picture of the shoreline without realizing that Keanu and Sandra were in the frame. He said he never used the photo for anything. He kept it because something about it felt meaningful. He said he believed the photo captured the exact moment the promise was born. Sandra's eyes glistened with emotion. Keanu pressed his lips together, unable to speak. Elian slowly reached into his coat pocket. He pulled out a small envelope that had clearly aged over the years. The corners were soft. The paper looked worn. He held it carefully, as if it contained something sacred, something fragile. He said the photo was inside. Keanu and Sandra stood absolutely still. The hall was so quiet that even the sound of Elian's fingers brushing against the paper echoed faintly. Elian looked at them with gentle, hesitant eyes and asked if they wanted to see it. Keanu nodded first, slowly. Sandra took a step closer to him. Her hand shook as she lifted it toward the envelope. Keanu placed his hand over hers, steadying her without hesitation or question. Elian handed the envelope to Sandra. Her fingers trembled as she opened it. She pulled out the faded photograph. Her breath left her body in a single soft gasp. Keanu leaned closer to look. The audience strained their eyes, trying to see from a distance. The photograph showed the beach at sunset, the ocean reflecting gold and pink light, and two silhouettes sitting close together, facing the waves. Their heads leaned toward each other, their shoulders almost touching. The small rings glinted faintly in the sand between them. It was the moment, the exact moment, the memory neither of them ever spoke about, captured forever without their knowledge. Sandra covered her mouth with her free hand as tears rolled down her cheeks. Keanu's eyes softened with overwhelming emotion. He gently touched the corner of the photo as if afraid it would crumble under his fingers. The room was silent again, but this silence was different. It was heavy with nostalgia, affection, pain, and longing all at once. Sandra whispered that she remembered. That light, the warmth of the sunset, the feeling of safety she had not felt in years. Her voice trembled as she said she remembered how close they had been that night without realizing it. Keanu whispered that he remembered too, remembering how her voice had softened when she talked. About her dreams, how she had looked toward the horizon like she was searching for something she had lost long ago. Elian stepped back slowly, giving them space, but then something strange happened. Sandra turned the photo around. There was writing on the back. Her hands trembled harder. Keanu read the words aloud quietly. The message said, "This is the moment. You both forgot, but life did nothing." Room shook with emotion. Sandra's knees weakened and she gripped Keanu's arm tightly. Keanu held her steady, his expression torn open by emotion. He had buried for years. Adeline swallowed hard and whispered that he did not write the words on the back. He said when he found the photograph months after leaving the retreat, the writing was already there. He said he did not know who wrote it or when. He said he kept it a secret because he feared no one would believe him. The host looked pale. The audience was stunned. Sandra looked at Keanu with tears in her eyes and whispered, "Keanu, someone knew. Someone saw something in us before we did." Keanu held the photograph between his fingers and whispered, "I know." But before they could speak again, a man in the audience suddenly stood up abruptly, his chair falling backward, and he shouted words that froze every heartbeat in the room. He shot Teddy. "No, who wrote it? Asterisk. Have you ever watched a single sentence break open a room? Have you ever seen truth rise from a stranger's voice with unstoppable force tonight? One." Man stood up and everything inside Keanu and Sandra shifted again the moment. The man shouted, "I know who wrote it." The entire hall snapped into a stillness so sharp and sudden it felt like the world had stopped spinning. The fallen chair clattered softly on the floor, but even that sound faded quickly under the weight of the silence. Every face turned toward the man standing near the middle rows. A man with trembling hands and eyes filled with something deeper than fear. It was guilt, grief, and a quiet fire of truth that had waited too long. Keanu instinctively placed a steady hand on Sandra's back, guiding her just a few inches behind him out of protection, not out of fear. Sandra did not hide. On to the man with a mixture of confusion, worry, and emotional readiness. She felt the room shift again. The air thickened, heavy with the weight of yet another truth approaching. The man swallowed hard. His breath was uneven. He looked like someone who had carried a secret for years and suddenly ran out of strength to keep holding it. He apologized through trembling lips for interrupting, but said he could not stay silent anymore. He said he had come to the event by chance. He said he never intended to speak. But hearing Elian's story, hearing Mara's truth, seeing the rings, seeing the photograph, it triggered something inside him that had stayed buried too long. Keanu stepped slightly forward, his voice calm, steady, and warm. He told the man to take a breath, to speak slowly, to know that no one in the room would judge him. Sandra nodded gently, encouraging him with soft eyes. They had both learned long ago that sometimes the hardest truths come from the quietest people. The audience leaned in like waves pulled toward the shore, drawn by the gravity of the moment. The man said his name was Daniel. He looked older than his voice sounded, with eyes that had clearly seen something life-changing years ago. He explained that he was not connected to the retreat center, not connected to Keanu's circle, not part of any team or crew. He said he was a writer once, someone who used to travel to find stories in small towns and retreats for feature articles. He said he stayed at the ocean retreat during the same week Keanu and Sandra were there. Keanu's eyebrows lifted. Sandra's eyes widened softly. Daniel continued, voice unsteady. He said he had been struggling back then. He felt lost in his career, unsure of his path, drowning in doubt. He said that he often walked the beach late at night looking for clarity, hoping the ocean would quiet his mind. That same night, Keanu and Sandra shared their moment on the beach. Daniel said he had been walking further down the shore, gathering notes in his journal. He said he saw two silhouettes near the waves from a distance. He did not know who they were at first, but he felt something undeniable in their posture, the soft closeness, the quiet, emotional gravity that wrapped around them like a gentle light. Asterisk, he said he saw when they placed the rings on the sand. He could not hear the words. He did not dare get closer. He said he watched only long enough to feel the sincerity of the moment, then walked away because it felt private, sacred, not meant for anyone else. Sandra pressed her hand against her chest again as she listened. The warmth of the memory washed over her. Keanu kept his eyes focused on Daniel, absorbing every word with thoughtful intensity. Daniel said he left the retreat early that night, returning to his room with a feeling he could not explain. He said the moment he witnessed stayed in his mind like a quiet whisper. He said he felt he had seen something rare in a world full of noise. The next morning, while walking the beach again, he noticed footprints and soft indentations in the sand where Keanu and Sandra had sat. He said the place felt like it was holding the last echo of something important. The audience listened with wide eyes. Some people held their breath without noticing. Daniel then said something that made Sandra's knees weaken slightly. He said he returned to the spot again later that afternoon and found a piece of paper half buried under the sand near the dune line. He picked it up thinking it was trash or forgotten notes. When he unfolded it, he saw the words written in soft, trembling handwriting. He said he did not understand the message fully, but the moment he read it, he felt it was not meant for him. He said the message said that the story was not finished. He said it felt like someone had written it for the two people he saw the night before. Keanu Single's eyes widened softly, recognition stirring inside his heart like a quiet wave, Daniel said. He felt something strange, something almost spiritual, urging him to protect the message. He said he tried to find the couple, but they had already left. He said he thought about leaving the note with the staff, but something inside him hesitated. Said he feared it would get lost or thrown away. He felt the moment deserved respect. He said later that night he saw Elian near the retreat's entrance carrying supplies and made a decision without fully understanding why. He said he approached Elian and quietly asked him to take the note and keep it safe. Said he believed Elian would understand its importance even if he did not know the full story. Elian's eyes widened in shock. Mara covered her mouth. The audience gasped softly. Keanu and Sandra both inhaled sharply. Elian whispered he remembered someone handing him folded paper that night, but he never knew who the man was. He said he had forgotten the man's face, but remembered the seriousness in his voice, the quiet urgency. Daniel nodded. Tears formed in his eyes. He said he did not sign the paper or explain anything. He only said, "This is meant for them. Keep it until the right moment." The room buzzed with emotion. Sandra's eyes welled with tears again. Keanu reached out gently to steady her hand. But then came the part that shook the room even deeper. Daniel said something else had happened that night that he had never told anyone. He said when he found the piece of paper, he believed it had been carried by the wind or someone had dropped it accidentally. But he said now, looking back, he realized the handwriting looked familiar, painfully familiar, unmistakably familiar. He said the handwriting looked like the handwriting of someone he had loved and lost. The audience gasped softly. Daniel swallowed hard, his voice cracking as he continued. He said his sister had passed away many years ago. She was a gentle soul who believed deeply in connections, compassion, and destiny. She used to write messages for strangers, leave kind notes in libraries, parks, and shelters, hoping to comfort someone she would never meet. He said when she died, he found boxes of her handwritten notes filled with warmth, advice, hope, and love. He said he recognized the curve of her letters, the softness in the ink, the slight tremble in her loops. He said the message he found on the beach had her handwriting. The room fell utterly silent. Sandra's tears spilled freely. Keanu felt his breath catch in his throat. Daniel's voice cracked as he said he did not know how her words ended up on that beach. He said he did not know if she had written the message long ago and it somehow drifted there. He said maybe someone had carried it accidentally. He said maybe his sister's old notes had been misplaced, sold, donated, or scattered. He said he did not believe in miracles then, but after losing her, he saw her handwriting everywhere, in small, unexpected corners of life. He said he believed his sister's message reached the two people who needed it the most. Keanu placed a hand gently over his heart. Sandra pressed her fingers against her lips, trying to hold herself together. The audience was breathless. Daniel said he felt responsible for delivering the message. He said he placed it into Elian's hands because he felt Elian would honor it without questioning. He said he believed the message was bigger than him, bigger than all of them. He said he came here tonight because he felt something pulling him toward this event, something whispering that the moment had finally arrived to complete what his sister had started. Elian stepped forward, his eyes wet. He reached out and gently touched Daniel's shoulder. The connection between them carried a deep sense of humanity, two strangers tied together by a single message that had traveled through time, wind, fate, and the hands of four people before returning to its rightful place. Sandra looked at Daniel and whispered a soft thank you. Keanu nodded at him with gratitude and quiet awe. Daniel lowered his head, overwhelmed by emotion, but the moment was not over, because Daniel said he had more to reveal. He said his sister was not only someone who left notes, she was someone who believed deeply in reading people's hearts. He said she used to write predictions not in a mystical way but in a soulful, intuitive way. She believed that sometimes you could see a future inside someone's kindness or their sadness, or the way they looked at someone when they thought no one was watching. Daniel said he found one unfinished notebook of hers after she died. Inside, it was a description that shocked him. He said his sister had written about watching two people once at an airport many years ago. She wrote about how the man looked at the woman with a soft, quiet admiration. She wrote about how the woman laughed in a way that lit up the man's entire expression. She wrote that the two people had something between them that felt like a beginning waiting to happen. Daniel said the notebook described the man with kind, tired eyes and the woman with a bright, warm smile. Daniel said he did not think much of it at the time because his sister wrote about many strangers she observed, but then he looked at Keanu and looked at Sandra and whispered that he believed they were the two people his sister wrote about. Sandra's breath broke into a soft sob. Keanu closed his eyes for a moment, overwhelmed. The room was no longer just emotional. It was shaken, stunned, trembling with the sense that destiny had been weaving threads all along. Daniel then said he had brought the notebook with him tonight because something told him he might need it. He reached into his bag and pulled out an old worn journal with a cracked spine and soft pages, held it gently like something sacred. He said his sister had left a final note. Inside the journal, unfinished but clear enough to read, he turned the notebook to the page and read, "Two souls who meet again and again, even when the world tries to separate. Them will one day face a truth they cannot ignore when the past returns to complete what was started." Sandra covered her mouth, tears falling. Faster. Keanu's chest rose and fell with deep, emotional breaths. The audience was silent as stone. Daniel looked at them with trembling sincerity and whispered that he believed tonight was the moment his sister wrote about. Mara cried silently. Elian stared at the ground, overwhelmed. The host looked pale, but just when the room felt like it had reached its emotional peak, when everyone thought nothing more could happen, something shifted in the very back of the hall. A woman stood up, very slowly, very calmly, and she said in a soft voice, a voice that sent chills through every person present, "Thor, something all of you forgot, and I am the one who must tell them." Keanu and Sandra turned sharply toward her. No one recognized her. The room held its breath again. Asterisk, have you ever felt time stop because a stranger spoke your truth? Have you ever watched destiny walk into a room wearing an ordinary face tonight? The final voice rose, and everything Keanu and Sandra thought they knew changed forever. Woman stood at the very back of the hall, her presence calm yet powerful. The crowd turned like a single wave, every head shifting toward her as if pulled by gravity. She was neither young nor old. Her hair fell softly to her shoulders, and her eyes held the kind of quiet wisdom that comes only from carrying long, silent stories. She did not look nervous. She looked prepared, as if she had been waiting for this moment her entire life. Sandra instinctively moved closer to Keanu. Keanu straightened with a quiet tension in his shoulders, not out of fear but readiness. Had faced many strange moments in life, but something about this woman's gaze made him feel that the final missing piece of the story was about to fall into place. The host tried to speak, but his voice cracked and he fell silent again. There were moments in life when the world demanded quiet. This was one of them. The woman walked slowly down the aisle. Her footsteps were soft, almost floating. Each step tightened the air. Mara watched her with wide eyes. Elian looked stunned. Daniel held his sister's notebook close to his chest as if protecting her memory. Asterisk when the woman reached the front. She stopped just a few feet from Keanu and Sandra. She looked at both of them with compassion, not intrusion. Then she turned slightly to address Daniel. She said his sister had been her closest friend. Daniel's breath broke. His lips trembled. Whispered his sister's name under his breath, shocked beyond words. The woman nodded softly. She introduced herself as Lyra. She said she and Daniel's sister had been like family. They'd shared dreams, heartbreak, secrets, and late-night conversations about kindness, destiny, and the invisible ways people's lives touched each other. The room held stillness like a delicate glass sphere. Lyra explained that Daniel's sister had confided in her many times about the people she observed and the little notes she wrote. She said she believed Daniel's sister had a rare gift, not a supernatural one, but a deeply human one. She recognized emotional truths long before others saw them. She sensed pain people hid, loved they ignored, and connections meant to last. Keanu and Sandra listened with quiet awe. Then Lyra said something that made Sandra's hand fly to her mouth. She said Daniel's sister had written about Keanu and Sandra twice, not just at the airport, not just by memory, not just by intuition. She had written about them the week before she died. The audience gasped softly. A few people covered their mouths. Even the host stepped back, overwhelmed. Lyra continued. She said Daniel's sister had told her a strange dream she had. In the dream, two people were standing on a beach at sunset. The man was quiet, gentle, carrying a deep sadness. The woman was strong but tired, carrying hope she could not admit. The two placed rings in the sand and made a soft promise. Lyra said when Daniel's sister told her the dream. She described the exact colors of the sunset, the soft sound of the waves, and the way the man looked at the woman as if he saw her soul. Keanu felt a chill move through his body. Sandra trembled, her tears forming again. Their minds returned to the retreat beach, the sunset, the whispered promise. Their hearts tightened in unison. Lyra said Daniel's sister believed the dream was not about fantasy. She believed it was something real that had happened somewhere. She felt compelled to write something for them, though she did not know who they were. She wrote the message. She tucked it inside one of her journals. She said someone would need it one day. 1 week later, she passed away. Daniel covered his face with both hands, tears streaming down his fingers. Mara cried openly. Ilian bowed his head, overwhelmed. But the room wasn't ready for what came next. Lyra took a slow breath. She said she visited the retreat center after Daniel's sister died. She needed to see the ocean. She needed to breathe the air from her friend's dream. She needed to feel the last echo of whatever truth her friend had sensed. She said she stood on the same beach at sunset and felt something strange, like a whisper calling through the wind. She said she walked along the sand and found a small folded note half buried under the dune line. The message was in Daniel's sister's handwriting. She recognized it instantly. Lyra's voice shook as she said she thought she was imagining things. She thought grief had twisted time, but she held the note with trembling hands, opened it, and saw the same message. Return this to him when the time is right. Their story is not finished. The audience gasped again. Sandra felt her knees weaken. Keanu placed a hand on her back to keep her steady. Lyra said she did not understand how the note had traveled. He was shaking quietly, tears still pouring down his cheeks. Ilian stared at Lyra with disbelief. Keanu whispered softly that he did not understand how the message moved across so many hands. Lyra nodded gently. She said she did not know either, but she believed the message carried itself. Through people, through mistakes, through grief, through fate, through moments that felt like accidents but were not. She said destiny sometimes wrote its own story by using the hands of ordinary people. Then Lyra said she had one final truth to share. She said Daniel's sister did not only dream of the beach, she dreamt of something else too. Something she wrote the night before she died. Something she never showed anyone except Lyra. Lyra reached into her coat slowly, carefully, and pulled out a folded piece of paper worn at the edges. She held it close to her heart for a moment, then handed it gently to Sandra. Sandra's hands trembled as she opened it. Keanu leaned closer, his breath unsteady. The audience watched with painful anticipation. Inside the paper was a final message, written in soft, trembling handwriting. 2 rings in the sand. 2 hearts afraid to speak. Time will scatter them, but time will return them. When they are ready to see each other with truth, not fear. Sandra's tears fell instantly. Keanu felt his heart drop into his stomach. But then Sandra saw something else on the bottom corner of the note, written in smaller, softer handwriting, almost hidden. Their promise was real, their moment was real, and one day, their truth will be too. Sandra covered her face and cried. Keanu wrapped an arm gently around her shoulders. Not for the audience, not for a story, but because her pain and her emotion flowed into him like they were connected by something older than time. The room was silent, except for quiet sobs. Lyra continued softly. She said her friend believed Keanu and Sandra had something rare, something quiet, something pure, something gentle, something patient, something that life would return to them when they were ready. She said she believed tonight was that moment. Keanu looked at Sandra. Sandra looked at Keanu. For the first time in years, they both allowed their hearts to stand uncovered. All the years of timing, distance, friendship, fear, responsibility, life, everything fell away for a moment. Keanu whispered her name softly, so softly it sounded like a prayer. Sandra wiped her tears with shaking fingers, her voice trembling as she whispered his name back. The audience watched, breathless, as if witnessing something they were never meant to see but could not turn away. From the rings on the table seemed to glow under the warm lights. The photograph in Keanu's hand trembled slightly in his grip. The old messages, the dreams, the notes, the unfinished story, everything had led to this moment. Keanu took a slow step toward Sandra and lifted the wooden box with both hands. Inside, the two rings lay together, just as they had on the sand all those years ago. Sandra stared at them, her breath uneven, her heart pounding, her eyes shimmering with a mixture of shock, love, pain, fear, and something deep that finally rose to the surface after so many years. Keanu looked at her gently. His voice cracked as he said, "I never brought these to pressure you. I brought them, so we could finally stop running from the truth that has lived in both of us for years." Sandra's tears fell harder. Keanu continued, his voice soft, steady. Trembling with sincerity, he said, "I don't know what the future is. I don't know what life wants from us, but I know one thing. I know the promise we made that night was real. Not the joke we pretended it was. Not the moment we tried to forget it was real. You were real, and my feelings were real, and maybe time kept bringing this back because it wanted us to stop hiding." Sandra sobbed quietly. She whispered, "I was scared to admit how much that moment meant to me because I thought you had forgotten, because I thought I had imagined it, because life kept moving and we kept pretending." Keanu shook his head softly. He whispered, "I never forgot. I carried it with me even when I didn't understand why." The audience wiped tears. Mara cried into her hands. Elian stood motionless. Daniel pressed the notebook to his heart. Leora watched with soft, knowing eyes. Sandra took a trembling breath and placed her hand gently over the rings in the box. Her voice broke into a whisper filled with years of buried truth. She said, "We made that promise because we saw something in each other. We were not ready, but maybe we are now." Keanu single quotes eyes shined. He whispered, "Are you sure?" Sandra nodded, tears streaming down her face, a small smile breaking through the pain. She whispered, "I am Keanu." Let out a soft breath of relief, like a wound inside him had finally healed. The audience clapped softly at first, then louder, then rose to their feet, giving them a standing ovation. Not for performance, not for fame, but for truth, for courage, for love, for destiny, for two hearts finally choosing honesty. Sandra leaned into Keanu, resting her head lightly against his chest. Keanu placed a gentle hand on her back. They stood together not as actors, not as co-stars, not as celebrities, but as two people who had finally stopped running from a story that life kept returning to them again and again. Keanu closed the wooden box and held it against his heart. Sandra placed her hand over his together. They faced the crowd, no fear, no hiding, only truth. The room held its breath, watching two rings and two hearts finally return to each other. And so, after years of silence, years of distance, years of mistiming, years of quiet longing, the story finished where it began, with a promise on a beach in the soft golden light. Between two souls finally ready to stop running and start healing together,